The funniest part is that the first time I watched Austin take my job, I was sitting at my own kitchen table in sweatpants, not in that glass office I'd lived in for 13 years. He had the ring light on full blast, angled just right so the shadows carved his jawline like a magazine ad. Behind him, I could clearly see my old whiteboard, my second monitor, even the dent on the cabinet where I'd once slammed my fist during an OSHA audit. The caption under his video said, "Day 1, bringing fresh energy to an outdated industry." Outdated industry. That industry had paid for his private school, his MBA, and probably the ring light he was using to announce that the old guard was gone. My name is Bob McKenzie. I'm 47 years old, former Army logistics specialist, and for more than a decade I was the invisible skeleton keeping Hartwell Industrial Solutions standing upright. If you've ever seen a big factory run on time, with the right parts in the right places and regulators not breathing down everyone's neck, you've probably seen someone like me. You just didn't notice. The video auto-played with the sound off at first, so I just saw him gesturing, pointing at my desks, spinning in my chair. When I tapped the volume up, his voice came through all chipper and smooth. He was talking about modernizing outdated processes and leveraging data to drive strategic decisions. I could almost taste the buzzwords through the screen. I paused the video and leaned back, staring at the frozen frame of this kid sitting in the command center I had built brick by brick. My coffee was cooling beside my elbow, the morning sun cutting a strip of light across the kitchen table. It felt like watching someone move into a house you'd built with your bare hands and brag about how they were finally making it livable. To understand why that stung, you have to rewind a bit. 13 years earlier, when I walked into Hartwell for the first time, it was chaos with a roof on it. They made industrial components, gears, bearings, hydraulic parts, heavy, greasy stuff that kept other people's machines alive. The factory floor was full of people who knew metal, knew machines, knew how to fix a jammed line with a wrench and a curse. What they didn't know, and didn't even pretend to know, was how any of their computer systems talked to each other. Back then, the ERP system they used could have been in a museum. Vendor management was a graveyard of Excel files saved on random desktops with names like new_final 3 XLSX. Compliance was whatever somebody remembered 2 days before a deadline. OSHA, EPA, state safety boards, all those acronyms hovered like storm clouds over a plant that was just trying to get parts out the door. I'd come out of the Army with one thing drilled into my bones. You don't trust luck, and you don't trust memory. At Fort Campbell, I learned that a missing crate of parts could ground an entire battalion. We had a saying, "Prior planning prevents poor performance." People think it's just a cute line. It isn't. I've seen what happens when planning fails and real lives are on the line. So when I took the job at Hartwell, I didn't start by talking. I started by watching. For 2 years, I followed paper trails and email chains the way investigators follow money. I sat with the woman in accounting who still printed every invoice and stapled it to a manila folder just in case. I spent nights with the warehouse manager, walking through shelves while he told me which product codes were wrong and which ones you just had to know. I answered vendor calls at 9 at night, listening to their side of the story when shipments went missing or payments were late. Slowly, a picture formed in my head. A tangle of systems and habits held together by duct tape, goodwill, and the same 3 people who never took vacations. Then I did what I'd been trained to do. I broke it down and built it back up. I wrote scripts that made our antique ERP talk to vendor portals it was never designed to speak to. I created crosswalk tables to match their purchase order numbers with ours, because nobody wanted to pay for a fancy integration and no off-the-shelf software understood the Frankensystem we were running. I set up alerts so we didn't discover low inventory when a truck was already at the loading dock and there was nothing to put on it. Compliance was a different kind of hell. Every agency wanted data sliced a different way, on a different schedule, with a different definition of incident or exposure. I built a separate tracking system that pulled from the ERP, from safety logs, from training records, then remixed it into whatever format each regulator demanded. That project alone took almost 3 years. When it finally ran without smoke coming out of my ears, our audit times dropped in half, and the inspectors started using words like impressed and model facility. Meanwhile, the culture inside the company never changed much. The guys on the floor learned that if something broke in the system, you called Bob. If a vendor screamed about an unpaid invoice, you called Bob. If OSHA sent a letter with too many paragraphs, you called Bob. They didn't know exactly what I did on my dual monitors, just that things worked after I touched them. Michael Hartwell, the owner, was one of those polished Midwestern CEOs who loved talking about innovation at conferences. He'd nod when I gave my quarterly updates, skim the charts, and say things like, "Great work, Bob. Love the green arrows." I could tell he never really understood that all those automations he bragged about in his speeches still had my fingerprints all over them. Then came the day that reset everything. I was in my office, my little glass box over the factory floor, elbow deep in a nasty ERP bug that was duplicating line items on a batch order. I had 3 vendor tabs open, a script window on one screen, and the compliance dashboard humming quietly on the other. It was just another Tuesday to me. The door opened without a knock. I looked up and saw Michael step in, eyes locked on his phone like it was telling him the secrets of the universe. He didn't sit. He didn't even fully cross the threshold. He just leaned on the doorframe like a guy poking his head into a break room. "Hey Bob, quick thing," he said, scrolling with his thumb. His tone was the same one he used when he asked someone to grab more coffee. Quick thing. My gut tightened. He finally glanced at me. "Austin starts Monday. I'm gonna have him take this office, get him closer to the operation. You can set up somewhere else for a bit, or work from home while we rearrange. We'll figure it out." Just like that. No conversation about transition. No discussion of what exactly I did in this room. No mention of training his son on any of the systems I'd stitched into existence. He might as well have said, "Slide your chair over. The kid needs the sunlight." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. I'd prepared for a lot of scenarios, budget cuts, new software, a merger, but I had never considered the possibility that he'd just evict the brain out of the skull and expect the body to keep walking. I remember staring at my screens, then at him, and feeling something click into place. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. Clarity. In the Army, there's a moment in any mission where you realize the plan you were handed isn't going to survive first contact with reality. In that moment, you either panic or you adapt. I'd already survived that lesson once. So I didn't argue. Didn't give him the scene he probably expected. "Of course," I said. That was all. He seemed almost surprised I didn't push back. He nodded, muttered something about appreciating my flexibility, and walked out, back to whatever meeting or email string felt more urgent than the man he just casually displaced. When the door closed, the office felt different. Quieter. It was like someone had turned off a fan I didn't know had been running for years. I looked around at the things I'd lived with for over a decade. The Army certificate on the wall, next to the 3 safety awards our division had earned under my watch. The whiteboard where I kept vendor exceptions written in a handwriting only I could read at full speed. The second monitor with the compliance pages always open, quietly ticking away toward deadlines that nobody else even knew existed. I let myself sit in that feeling for about 20 minutes. Long enough to accept that this wasn't a misunderstanding. Long enough to see that the man upstairs truly believed all this could go on without me, as long as someone sat in my chair and spoke the right language on social media. Then I stood up and made a decision. I took only 3 things. First, my old metal travel mug with the faded company logo, the one I'd refilled on countless overnight shifts. Second, the black notebook that never left my desk. A scuffed, thick thing full of hand-drawn flows. Vendor contacts, system quirks, password hints only I could decode. Little reminders like, "Jim at Midwest hates voicemail. Always email first." Third, a small flash drive from the back of my drawer, the one with every custom script and manual override I had ever written for Hartwell. Not company data. My work. Years of keystrokes distilled into one sliver of plastic. The monitors, the ergonomic chair, the cheap little plant that somehow kept surviving fluorescent lights. I left all of that. I wanted Austin to have the full experience. Before I walked out, I sat down one last time and wrote a short email to HR. Transitioning to temporary remote work while office reshuffling occurs. Available via email as needed. Neutral. Polite. No fireworks. I knew how corporate memory worked. They'd file it, forget it, and 6 months later swear it had always been that way. Then I picked up my mug, my notebook, and that flash drive, stepped out of my office, and walked past the humming lines and forklifts without saying goodbye. I didn't look back through the glass. I didn't stand in the parking lot for one last sentimental inhale. I got in my truck, started the engine, and drove home. The next time I saw that office, it was through the front-facing camera on Austin's phone, wrapped in ring light glow and empty promises about modernization. As I sat there in my kitchen watching him sell my life's work as his next chapter, I could feel a different kind of plan forming. Not revenge in the movie sense, no sabotage, no anonymous tip-offs. Something cleaner, more precise. I knew exactly how many invisible threads held that company together. And for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I stopped being the one quietly tying them back together every time someone pulled too hard. By Tuesday morning, I already had a front row seat to a train wreck I didn't even have to cause. All I had to do was sit at my kitchen table, sip my coffee, and watch gravity do its work. The first alarm bell came at 8:17 a.m., right on schedule. That was when the Tuesday operations report normally hit every manager's inbox. Inventory levels, vendor exceptions, overdue POs, projected shortages, seasonal adjustments, a neatly packaged snapshot that let the entire plant know whether they were headed for a calm day or a 5-alarm fire. I had been the one packaging that snapshot for over a decade. So when my phone buzzed, I already knew what it would say before the notification loaded. An email from Austin. Subject: "Where's the weekly report?" The kid even CC'd half the senior management team like he was demonstrating leadership. I didn't open it. I just watched the preview text. I'm not seeing the Tuesday metrics. Is the system delayed? The system. God help me. There was no system. I was the system. For 13 years, I had manually pulled data from 5 different sources, cross-checked them against the warehouse logs, adjusted for supplier quirks, corrected for seasonal noise the software couldn't interpret, and reformatted everything into English instead of machine gibberish. Every Tuesday at 8:15 a.m., without fail, I leaned back in my chair and smiled the smallest, pettiest smile I'd allowed myself in years. By 9 a.m., I got a second notification, this time from Gary in IT. I didn't even have to open the email. The snippet said it all. I explained to him this report was never automated. He didn't believe me. I could picture it. Austin standing over Gary's desk, ring light confidence fading fast, insisting there had to be a dashboard somewhere that magically generated the report in the cloud. Poor Gary. The man could rebuild a corrupted database from scratch, but he didn't have the emotional stamina for MBA delusion. I ignored the follow-ups, made myself another coffee, took the time to vacuum my living room, something I hadn't done on a weekday in 15 years. At 10:43 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID said, Hartwell Industrial, main line. I let it buzz 4 times before flipping it face down on the table. It buzzed a 5th time. Then silence. The next buzz wasn't Hartwell. It was a name I recognized immediately. Jim, Midwest Steel. I hadn't decided whether to pick up. But then I thought back to how many times Jim stayed late at his shop to help me fix a mismatched invoice, and I tapped accept. His voice came through loud and flat, like a man trying not to lose his temper. Bob, what the hell is going on over there? I kept my tone neutral. I'm not in the building anymore, Jim. Well, that explains a lot. He exhaled sharply. The kid approved an invoice this morning for 500 assemblies, when your system only shows 450. That's an indexing error, I told him. Check product code variance. The warehouse sometimes enters 34B under B34 because the label printer glitches. There was a long silence on the line. Finally, Jim said, Jesus Christ. You know their system better than they do. I didn't respond. Then he cleared his throat, a tone I'd heard before when we were about to discuss real money. Listen, we've been thinking about bringing in an outside consultant, someone who actually understands vendor integration and why our payment cycles always get jammed up. You interested? I looked around my kitchen, sun streaming in, the peace of not being hunted by 10 different deadlines. the flash drive lying innocuous on the table beside my mug. "Yeah," I said. "I'm interested." That first contract was small by corporate standards, but to me it felt like a tectonic shift. 3 months, $12,000. More than Hartwell paid me in a quarter. And most importantly, it put me on the map, not as an employee, but as the guy people trusted when they wanted their operations fixed by someone who actually knew how manufacturing worked outside of a TikTok clip. While Hartwell was unraveling, I was sitting on my couch drafting the initial outline of McKinsey Industrial Consulting. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about survival, and maybe just a bit of justice. But the universe wasn't done handing me material. On Wednesday morning, less than 48 hours after the missing report, Hartwell's first compliance problem hit like a brick through a window. I didn't know it from Hartwell directly. I knew it because someone forwarded me an internal message, no name attached, probably sent through a personal email. The message read, "State Safety Board sent an inspection notice. Austin has no idea where the chemical storage documentation is. He keeps asking people if it's in the cloud." I laughed so hard I snorted coffee. Chemical storage documentation. The files were in a password-locked folder on the compliance drive, updated manually every month by me, because no automation in the world could handle Hartwell's bizarre mix of chemical batch codes, MSDS forms, revision histories, and handwritten notes from supervisors who didn't trust computers. Austin calling me the next morning was inevitable. I answered on the 4th ring, mostly because I wanted to hear the panic in his voice. "Bob, hey, quick question," he said, trying to sound casual and failing spectacularly. "Regarding the safety compliance notice, we just need to know where those protocols are kept." I kept my voice flat. "In the compliance database." "Which is where exactly?" "Password protected and updated monthly." There was a long pause, long enough that I could picture him blinking. Right, yeah. "So, could you give me the password?" "No." Another beat of stunned silence. "I work on retainer now," I said calmly. $150 an hour. 3-month minimum. He inhaled sharply. "I'll talk to my dad." I hung up before he finished. By Thursday afternoon, I was sitting outside on my porch, enjoying a spring breeze I didn't have time to notice for 13 years, when my phone buzzed again. This time the message was from an unknown number. "Bob, this is Lisa from Richardson Manufacturing. Need to ask you something. Are you consulting now?" Richardson Manufacturing was one of Hartwell's biggest clients. Steady, predictable, and loyal. If they were reaching out, something at Hartwell had gone from mildly concerning to fully on fire. I called her back. Her voice was tight, all business. "We're pulling our contract. Deliveries late, communication sloppy." Someone named Austin gave us a scripted answer when we asked for clarification. "We need someone who actually knows this industry. Can you come audit our vendor workflow next month?" I walked inside and grabbed my notebook. "Yes," I said. "I can." By Friday, I had a second contract in motion, $15,000 for an in-depth operational audit. I was suddenly making CEO money without stepping foot inside a corporate building. Meanwhile, Hartwell was drowning. I only heard pieces of it, mostly through texts from people who used to lean on me every day. Payroll almost missed a vendor payment batch. Austin tried to simplify the workflow. Broke everything. OSHA inspector wants documentation we don't have. He asked if you still work here. Austin keeps holding meetings about strategic optimization, while the warehouse is yelling at him over missing assemblies. Someone even sent me a screenshot of an Instagram story Austin posted from my old office with the caption, "Learning the ropes. Growth mindset." He looked exhausted. The ring light looked tired too. On Friday afternoon, the final blow of the week landed. "Jim again. Kid just approved a payment for a shipment we didn't even send yet," he said. "He's drowning, Bob. They all are." I didn't say anything. Jim lowered his voice. "And listen, we've been talking to our counterparts at Parker Hydraulics and Great Lakes Bearing. Everyone's having problems with Hartwell since you left. Word is spreading. They all want someone who can clean up their operations. You want me to pass your name around?" For a moment, I didn't speak. Then I said, "Yeah, Jim. You can pass my name around." When I hung up, I sat there for a long minute, staring at the quiet house around me. For years, I'd believed that if I ever left Hartwell, the building would go on without missing a beat. They'd plug in some new guy, maybe two guys, maybe even a whole department, but the machine would keep humming. But that week proved something I hadn't dared to say out loud. I had been holding the place together with nothing but grit, duct tape, and brain cells. And now that I wasn't there to sweep up the cracks, those cracks were turning into canyons. By the end of week 1, I had 2 contracts signed, 3 inbound inquiries, and a calendar so full I had to buy a real planner instead of jotting everything on loose sticky notes. Meanwhile, Hartwell couldn't even file their safety paperwork. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't touch a single system. All I did was leave. And leaving, apparently, was enough to flip the entire company upside down. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was just the warm-up. By the start of week 2, Hartwell wasn't just wobbling anymore. It was shaking like a machine missing 3 bolts and a safety guard. And all I had to do was wake up in the morning, make breakfast, and let the damage reveal itself, one email, one phone call, one panicked rumor at a time. On Monday at 7:12 a.m., before I'd even finished buttering my toast, my phone buzzed with a text from an old coworker, someone who'd been at Hartwell long before either Austin or his ring light existed. The message read, "OSHA inspector back today. Austin is pale. Michael is shouting behind closed doors." I set my toast down and chuckled. OSHA inspectors do not come back unless something is seriously wrong. Usually, they file their notes, issue warnings, and return a year later. A same-week reappearance meant Austin had either given them incomplete documentation or tried to bluff through questions he didn't understand. Both seemed equally likely. By mid-morning, another message came in from a different number. Insurance rep on site. Premium increase triggered automatically. Austin had no idea that missing paperwork counts as a potential liability incident. I took a sip of coffee. That right there, that single sentence, summed up the gap between experience and enthusiasm. Enthusiasm gets you likes on LinkedIn. Experience keeps a factory from being shut down. At 11:03 a.m., I received the funniest message yet. It was a photo. A blurry shot of Austin standing in the warehouse, surrounded by employees who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. He held a binder upside down. The caption from the sender said, "He thinks the SDS binder is an onboarding manual." I nearly spit my coffee. You don't mistake a safety data sheet binder for onboarding materials unless you've never worked anywhere outside a classroom. Those binders are thick, bright red, and labeled like a hazard warning. I once joked that if the building burned down, OSHA would still expect us to save that binder first. But Austin didn't know that. Instead of heading over to Hartwell to help, I opened my laptop and drafted the proposal for Midwest Steel, the full version. 6 pages outlining my assessment plan, workflow redesign, vendor reconciliation improvements, and a phased rollout for automated cross-checking. I priced it at $12,000 for the quarter. Jim emailed back 10 minutes later with one word: approved. I stared at the message for a moment. The simplicity of it, the confidence behind it. For years, the best response I got at Hartwell was, "Good job, Bob." If anyone even remembered to say it. Now, I didn't have to convince anyone. Didn't have to justify a budget request. Didn't have to fight for resources. People trusted me because they knew what I did worked. Around lunchtime, I got a call from Lisa at Richardson Manufacturing, the client who'd already decided to jump ship. "Bob," she said, getting straight to the point. "We need you sooner than expected." "What happened now?" I asked. "Your former company refuses to acknowledge they missed a shipment. Austin sent us a templated apology email talking about unexpected process delays. I've seen enough of those to know it means things are falling apart." I pictured Austin writing that email with his jaw tight, ring light glowing behind him in the office I used to command like a mission control center. "What's your timeline?" I asked. "Tomorrow, if possible." I checked my calendar, already filling up faster than I'd expected. But this was a big one, and they'd been nothing but fair to me over the years. "I can do tomorrow morning," I told her. "Good. Bring your expertise. We're ready to move fast." I hung up the phone and sat there in silence. The shift was surreal. People who once saw me as the guy in the IT-looking office now spoke to me the way you speak to surgeons or lawyers, with respect, urgency, and trust. But Hartwell wasn't done providing entertainment. On Tuesday afternoon, at 2:11 p.m., my phone vibrated again. This time with a number I recognized but hadn't seen since he'd walked into my office with that careless, dismissive line that started this whole avalanche. Michael Hartwell. I didn't pick up. He didn't leave a voicemail. Instead, a minute later, I got a text. Bob, need to speak. It's urgent. I let him sit with the silence for an hour before replying. I'm unavailable. Please contact me through my business line. I added my consulting number. I wasn't being petty. I was being professional. He wanted my expertise. He could follow the same process everyone else used. He didn't respond. That night, around 9:30 p.m., as I was cleaning up after dinner, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a former supervisor at Hartwell, someone who was always too smart to say anything political but always observant enough to know everything. FYI, Austin tried to run one of your reconciliation scripts. Failed. He didn't know about the pre-processing steps. Spent 2 days debugging. Finally gave up and just paid every invoice. I closed my eyes. Paying invoices blindly is like handing your wallet to a stranger and telling him to just grab what seems fair. In manufacturing, where margins are tight and vendor relationships make or break entire product lines, that kind of mistake doesn't just hurt. Cascades. By Thursday, Cascade turned into collapse. At 8:02 a.m., I got a message from a number with an Ohio area code. Mr. McKenzie, this is Dan from Great Lakes Bearing. Jim from Midwest recommended you. We need consulting help ASAP. Our purchase order system keeps failing when it syncs with Hartwell. Can you assist? I stood there for a long moment looking at the message. This wasn't just a ripple. This was turning into a wave, one sweeping through the entire supplier network Hartwell depended on. Before I replied, my phone rang again. Another number I didn't recognize. Mr. McKenzie? This is Janet, formerly scheduling at Hartwell. I heard you might be opening a consulting firm. I wanted to see if you needed someone. Her voice cracked a little on that last part. Janet had been laid off in January, one of the right-sizing victims when Austin convinced his father that the company was too bloated. She was the best production scheduler I'd ever seen. She could predict delays before they existed. I didn't let her finish. Yes, Janet, I said. I need someone. She laughed. A soft, relieved sound I hadn't heard in years. And suddenly, everything felt real. Later that same day, Gary, the maintenance supervisor who knew every machine by name and temperament, called me. He'd been cut in the second round of layoffs. You still in the business of saving companies that don't deserve you? He asked. Not anymore, I said. Now I work for the ones who value expertise. He paused. Got room for one more? I looked around my home office, the scattered notes, the half-built consulting model on the whiteboard, the empty chair diagonal from my desk. Yes, I told him. There's room. By Friday evening, McKenzie Industrial Consulting wasn't just an idea on a notepad. It was a real team, small, scrappy, but deadly efficient. The kind of team you call when your operations are bleeding out and you don't want a PowerPoint Band-Aid. You want a surgeon. And while Hartwell's chaos grew louder, more embarrassing, more public, my house grew busier. Janet came by Saturday morning with her old scheduling binders and a laptop under her arm. Gary arrived with a duffel bag full of manuals, sketches, and wiring diagrams he'd saved, in case they came in handy someday. We set up folding tables in my basement. It wasn't glamorous. The lights flickered sometimes, and Gary had to tighten a valve on the water heater when it groaned too loudly. But it was ours. By Sunday night, I had 4 contracts active, 2 more pending, and a waiting list forming. Even though I hadn't advertised, hadn't posted anything online, hadn't even made a website yet. Word of mouth in the manufacturing world travels faster than any marketing agency. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to sabotage Hartwell. I didn't need to manipulate anything. All I had to do was step aside and let the truth fill the vacuum. Hartwell had replaced their invisible backbone with a kid-chasing spotlight. And the fallout was just beginning. By the start of month 3, Hartwell was no longer a company in trouble. It was a company trying to hide a wildfire behind a conference room door. And everyone in the industry knew it. You could practically hear the whispers in every vendor's office, in every client's supply chain meeting. Whatever happened when Bob left, it broke something. But the moment the break became visible to the whole world came on a Monday morning, 8:42 a.m., when my phone lit up with a message from a former Hartwell supervisor. A gruff old-timer named Reggie who never used emojis and never exaggerated anything. His message read, "Inventory system crashed. Completely dead. They can't ship, can't receive, can't even check what's in the building." I stared at the text until the screen dimmed. I knew exactly how catastrophic that was. Manufacturing survives on 2 things: trust and timing. If you lose track of what you have, what you owe, or what you promised to deliver, you lose everything else with it. And right now, Hartwell had just lost all 3. 10 minutes later, a second message came in. "Austin tried to update your old integration script. Deleted half the approval steps. IT is in full panic." I closed my laptop gently, stood up, and walked outside onto the porch. The sky was clear, the air sharp, the kind of morning that made you want to take a long drive just to think. Instead, I watched a single delivery truck drive past my street and thought, somewhere today, a truck like that is sitting idle outside Hartwell, waiting for paperwork that will never come. Throughout the day, the messages kept coming. Some from numbers I knew, some from unknown numbers, some even from personal emails of people who had never contacted me directly before. Shipment to Industrial Dynamics 2 weeks late. They're furious. Michael is losing it. Slammed a door so hard it cracked the frame. Austin is crying in the warehouse office. Not kidding. Board called an emergency meeting. They want an explanation. And then the hardest message to ignore. They're going to blame you to the board. I read that one 3 or 4 times. Not because I was surprised, but because it felt like punctuation on a chapter that had been building for months. They weren't wrong in a way. Removing one person shouldn't have detonated an entire operation, but Michael had spent years believing the systems ran themselves, that I was just another guy tapping on a keyboard. If you remove the foundation from a house expecting the walls to hold, that's not the foundation's fault. Late that night, a little past 10 p.m., I heard a car engine I recognized before I even looked out the window. A BMW, black, polished, expensive. I'd ridden in it twice. Once for a vendor dinner. Once when Michael insisted on giving me a lift during a snowstorm. Back then, he'd talked to me like a trusted advisor. Now it sat parked in front of my house with headlights dimmed but engine still running. I stood in my kitchen, lights off, watching him through the blinds. He didn't get out immediately. He sat there in the dark, elbows on the steering wheel, head resting against his hands, for almost 10 minutes, as if he was practicing what he needed to say, or bargaining with himself about whether he should say it at all. When he finally stepped out and walked up my driveway, his shoulders sagged. Not the posture of a CEO, not the posture of a father defending his son, but the posture of a man who'd run out of runway. He rang the doorbell. I let him wait a full 5 seconds before opening. Not out of spite, out of calculation. My time was valuable. He needed to feel that. When I swung the door open, he forced a smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "Bob," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I stepped aside. I didn't offer him a handshake, and he didn't try. He walked into my living room like a man entering a courtroom. The room was neat, warm, quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling through his company. I could see him noticing that. I poured myself a whiskey and deliberately didn't offer him one. He cleared his throat. "So, things have been complicated." Complicated. That was one word for it. I didn't sit. I let him start. He ran a hand through his hair, something I'd never seen him do at work, and exhaled. "We've lost 3 more clients," he said. "Insurance raised our liability premiums again. OSHA flagged us for incomplete corrective documentation. Our ERP vendor wants to review our integration after the crash. And our second largest customer just sent us a notice of termination." I nodded slowly, waiting for the part he didn't want to say. And he hesitated. And the board is asking questions. There it was. Questions like, why did you replace the man who built your entire operational backbone with your inexperienced son? Why did you assume the ship would sail without a navigator? Why did you bet the company on buzzwords and wishful thinking? He looked up at me, eyes tired, jaw tight. Bob, we need you back. I said nothing. I'm prepared to restore your salary, he continued. Give you your old office, a larger team, budget flexibility, whatever you need. I took a slow sip of whiskey. He swallowed. Just come back. Help us fix this. I let the silence stretch. It wasn't awkward for me. It was the first time in years that he had to sit in silence and wait for my decision. Finally, I spoke. I'm unavailable. His face tightened, confused. Bob, be reasonable. You're 47. Consulting, we both know that's temporary. You need long-term stability, benefits, retirement, the structure of being part of a real company. A laugh escaped me, quiet but sharp. Michael, you still don't get it. I walked to my coffee table, picked up a folder, and held it out. He took it reluctantly, like it might bite. Inside was the 6-month financial report for McKinsey Industrial Consulting. Revenue, clients, retainers, growth projection, team expansion, prospective accounts, everything. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. His pupils widened. $380,000? He whispered. His voice cracked. In 6 months. 8 active clients, I said. Booked solid through December. 2 more consultants starting next quarter. He flipped the page again, stunned. This is more than we paid you in 3 years. Yes, I said simply. Because they value what you never did experience. He let the folder fall shut. He stared at it like it was the final nail in a coffin. So what do you want me to tell the board? He finally asked. The defeat in his voice was almost painful to hear. I met his eyes. Tell them the truth. He blinked. Which is? That you gave away your entire institutional knowledge base. I said. To make room for a kid with a ring light. He looked down at the folder. His hands shook ever so slightly. Tell them, I continued, that every system that worked did so because one person, me, held the map. Tell them your succession plan was putting the map in the shredder. And tell them the market has already corrected your mistake. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth sat between us like a weight neither of us could move. After a long moment, he stood up. Bob, I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close. But it was the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. I walked him to the door. As he stepped outside, he turned back. If you ever change your mind, I won't, I said. He nodded once, slowly, then walked back to the BMW, shoulders still slumped, and drove away into the dark. I closed the door, set the whiskey down, and exhaled. Not out of triumph, out of clarity. For 13 years, I had been invisible. Now, for the first time, the world saw me clearly. And Hartwell? They finally saw what happens when you mistake a backbone for a chair that can be moved around at will. Their collapse wasn't my revenge. But watching it happen, it was the moment I realized I'd never been the one who needed them. They had always been the ones who needed me, and they realized it 5 months too late. By the time summer rolled in, hot, heavy, and loud with cicadas, Hartwell Industrial Solutions was a skeleton of the company I once knew. And I don't mean that poetically. I mean the numbers, the people, the clients, the heartbeat of the operation. All of it had thinned out like someone had taken an eraser to the blueprint. What made it surreal wasn't the speed of the collapse. It was how predictably, mathematically inevitable it all seemed once the first cracks appeared. Manufacturing failures don't explode. They cascade. One misfiled safety report becomes a premium increase. One missed shipment becomes a severed contract. One system crash becomes a domino of lost trust. I had seen it happen in the Army with supply lines, and now I was seeing it happen from my new office, 2 floors above a strip mall laundromat with the loudest dryers in the state. and business was booming. We'd moved out of my basement in April. The new office wasn't fancy. White walls, old carpet, flickering fluorescent light, but it was ours. We bought mismatched desks on Facebook Marketplace. Gary rewired half the ceiling lights himself, and Janet filled the front wall with scheduling boards like she was decorating a command center. It was messy, it was chaotic, and it was alive in a way Hartwell hadn't felt in years. By June, McKenzie Industrial Consulting had 6 active clients, an $85,000 annual retainer with Industrial Dynamics, and more inquiries coming in than we could answer in a week. And the best part? Every single contract came from word of mouth. No ads, no LinkedIn posts, no chasing business. People came to us because they were tired of being promised efficiency by people who had never set foot on a factory floor. They wanted real operators. They wanted people who fixed problems, not talked around them. They wanted us. Meanwhile, Hartwell kept feeding the rumor mill like a broken pipe that no one bothered to shut off. I didn't look for updates, but updates came for me anyway. Through texts, emails, LinkedIn messages, even whispered conversations overheard at client sites. Hartwell closed the Toledo branch. Another wave of layoffs. They hired a big Chicago consulting firm, costing them $200,000 to rebuild half the system you wrote. OSHA came back again. 2 more violations. 2 more major clients left this month. Stock at $18. Some board members want new leadership. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. If anything, I felt an odd mixture of sadness and inevitability. I had spent years of my life keeping that place functional, sometimes at the expense of my own sleep, my own sanity. Watching it collapse felt like watching a bridge you once helped maintain finally buckle and fall because someone decided the bolts were old-fashioned. But emotion wasn't going to help them now, and it definitely wasn't going to pull me back into the wreckage. One afternoon in early July, I was in our new office reviewing Parker Hydraulics workflow when Janet poked her head into my door. "You've got mail," she said, holding a crisp white envelope like it was radioactive. Physical mail, not email. I raised an eyebrow. Physical mail usually meant something big, legal, financial, or a thank you card from a client we just saved. She handed it to me. The return address made me laugh under my breath. Hartwell Industrial Solutions, Corporate Office. Attention, Robert McKenzie. I slid a finger under the flap and pulled out a letter printed on expensive stationery, heavy paper, embossed logo, too formal for day-to-day business. It was the kind of paper you only use when you're trying to impress investors or beg someone for mercy. The letter was short. "Mr. McKenzie, as we undergo strategic restructuring, we are seeking experienced leadership to support our operational recovery and long-term stability. We would like to formally invite you to interview for Director of Systems and Operations." It even included a proposed salary. I laughed, out loud. Janet looked startled. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'm great," because the number they wrote, salary, bonus, benefits, was less than what my company earned in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I folded the letter neatly, slipped it back into the envelope, and tossed it into the shred pile without comment. That evening, as I turned off the lights in the office, my phone buzzed. A message request on LinkedIn, from a name I hadn't seen in months. Austin Hartwell. The message preview made me freeze for half a second. Not because I was surprised, but because it was so painfully predictable. "Hey Bob, hope you're doing well. I've been doing some reflecting. Learned a lot these past few months. I'm working at a startup in Austin now doing social media marketing. Would love to grab coffee and maybe get your advice on operations and leadership. I really admire the way you ran things. Operations and leadership. From the same kid who, 5 months earlier, took my office with a ring light and a grin." I opened the message fully. Continued, "Maybe you could teach me some of what you know. I realize now I didn't appreciate it before." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Not angry, not smug, just tired in a way that felt older than my age. Some lessons really do have to be learned the hard way. I locked my phone, slipped it into my pocket, turned off the final light in the office. The darkness felt peaceful, like closing a chapter. I didn't reply, and I wouldn't. Later that week, while consulting for Industrial Dynamics, their procurement director pulled me aside and said, "Bob, I heard about what happened at your old place. People say you were the backbone." I smiled slightly. "I wasn't the backbone," I told him. "I was just the guy who knew which cables kept the lights on." He chuckled, but I wasn't joking. There's a truth about operations most executives learn too late. Not everything important comes with a fancy title. Some of the people who keep your company alive never ask for credit, never show up on stage, never speak in meetings unless spoken to. They aren't loud, they aren't flashy, and they don't post on social media about their accomplishments. But they know your systems the way a surgeon knows an artery. And when you push those people aside, when you assume software or a new degree or someone with better hair can replace them, you discover something brutal. Some knowledge cannot be automated. Some systems cannot be rebuilt. Some people cannot be replaced. But you only realize it when they're gone. These days, when a young executive calls my consulting line bragging about optimizing their operations, I always ask the same question. Who's the person actually keeping your systems alive? 9 times out of 10, they don't know. And that's usually the moment I write their name on my whiteboard, not as a client yet, but as a future emergency waiting to happen. Because sooner or later, every company figures out what Hartwell did. When you fire or ignore the person who holds the map, the whole expedition gets lost. Some do it quietly. Some do it spectacularly. But they all do it the same way. They believe the map wasn't worth anything until they're standing in the dark with no idea which way is forward. And when that day comes, my phone rings, and business gets good again.